That devastating attack, India is united in grief and united in anger. And it's a day where all of us are left trying to figure out what is the next step that should be taken. How do we prevent any other incident like this? And joining us now, somebody who's been the Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, Omar Abdullah, joining us to perhaps share some of his thoughts on what can be done, what should be done. And your sense first, Omar, you must be as disturbed as anybody else is on what's happened 24 hours ago. You must have had some time to think about it also. What do you think went wrong? What could have been done differently? What is it that we should do now?
Look, Vikram, hindsight is 2020. Of course, we're deeply disturbed, deeply concerned by the attack in Pulwama yesterday and the very high level of casualties. Till this time, we still don't have an accurate number of the actual number of those who were killed in the line of fire and the number of injured. But be that as it may, obviously with every attack of this nature, there are lessons to be learnt. There are SOPs to be redrafted. We had, for various obvious reasons, lulled ourselves into a sense of complacency because militancy had been on the wane and had shown seriously declining trends up until 2014, 2015. Subsequent to that, you've seen an increase in militancy, you've seen an increase in local recruitment, and yesterday, you saw a return to a phenomenon that we haven't seen in decades, which was the use of car-borne explosives in a suicide mission.
Are you particularly alarmed by one of the factors that you spoke about, the increase in the number of locals who are taking to militancy? This was a person from the area. Local recruitment had gone down. Now, if you look at it, it's much higher than it's been for a long period of time. Does that send a certain signal that we should be particularly concerned about? Yes, there are other sides of it also, efforts to come back.
I think that is more than anything else, that is what should worry us. More than anything else, it's the phenomenon over the last few years of local youngsters joining the ranks of militants, and not just the uneducated ones who you would believe don't see a future for themselves. They don't see the possibility of employment. You've had college professors, you've had PhD students, you've had very well-educated and qualified people leaving well-paying jobs to join the ranks of militants. In the case of yesterday's attack, it was a local young man who had joined up with the militant organization and carried out this attack. Now, in the past, we've sort of convinced ourselves that the suicide attackers, or the Fidain as we call them, they are Pakistanis, or they are Afghans, or they are other nationals. But it's not the Kashmiri militant who carries out suicide attacks. Yesterday's attack debunks that theory as well. So there are a whole host of things that have changed in recent times that we're going to have to factor in.
And there are disturbing signs also of increasing communal polarization, which is continuing to happen. Disturbing reports coming in today, for example, of incidents of arson, of rioting, of other trouble in the Jammu regions. And at the same time, equally disturbing images yesterday and disturbing reports on social media and elsewhere that there were actually people in the Kashmir Valley who were celebrating this, the murder of 40 CRPF Jawans. So those are again worrying signs that I think we need to take stock of. And what, by the way, now that I have you on that, what is the latest that you're hearing about the situation in Jammu?
Well, I think both sides deserve equal condemnation. Celebrating the deaths of the soldiers in the attack yesterday. Which religion allows for that? I know for a fact that mine doesn't. So where in our scriptures do they find this sort of lesson that you must celebrate the deaths of people? And what you saw today in Jammu gangs of youngsters on motorcycles out simply with one aim in mind, and that's to target Muslims and Kashmiris. They looked for vehicles with registration numbers that were Valley registered and went about setting them on fire. The whole purpose of this is to polarize an environment, and as I said, both sides have equal content.
Right. Omar, I saw you tweeting a little earlier in the day that, that states in other parts of the country need to worry a little bit about Kashmiri students who are there and ensure that they are fine. And of course, there's no exception with that is correct. But perhaps a message also should be sent. We've seen some Kashmiri students in other parts of the country in various educational institutions who have come out with what can only be described shockingly insensitive, if not absolutely reprehensible comments on social media and elsewhere. If that happens, then there will be consequences.
Absolutely, there is no place for comments like those. You have no business studying in colleges and universities in other parts of the country. In all probability, taking advantage of scholarship schemes made available by the government of India in various names. And then going on about and celebrating the deaths of 40 plus people. As I said, I mean, there is no justification in any religion for celebration of death. And so yes, while on the one hand I have appealed to the Home Minister to ensure that there is no trouble, in the same breath, I will also appeal to these students studying in institutions in the rest of the country to please not do or say anything that will invite trouble, particularly for those students who have stayed far away from trouble, whose only interest is in acquiring a proper education and making a future for themselves.
Okay, let me just move now to the next steps. What should happen next? It's crystal clear. We've heard it from across the board, every political party. A lot of international support also seems to be coming in, saying that, look, how long is this going to continue? We've been talking about Masood Azhar and Jaish-e-Mohammed since 1999. I think you were a minister in the central government at that time when Masood Azhar, was released. Jaish-e-Mohammed has carried out carnage in the country for 20 years now. Parliament attack with Jaish-e-Mohammed, Pathankot, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Uri, Jaish-e-Mohammed. And despite that, Masood Azhar continues to live and thrive and do well in Pakistan. So obviously there's a sense of anger, and that's completely understandable. What can actually be done on a practical level to try and get Pakistan to hand him across, take some action against him, take some steps? I mean, you've been an external affairs minister. What do you think India's options can be?
Well, I really don't know. Obviously, the next steps will have to be very carefully calibrated. They will have to be very carefully considered. But we also have to be careful in what we go out promising the country if we're not going to be able to deliver it. In the past, in the aftermath of the terrible attack in Uri, we had similar statements that we will isolate Pakistan internationally. Now, I know for a fact that we were unable to do that even in the aftermath of the Parliament attack. We were unable to do that in the aftermath of the 26/11 Mumbai. We most certainly were unable to do it in the aftermath of the Uri attack. So, what makes this attack different?
No, so if you can't unite,
are we going and telling
but hang on, if I can just
everyone
take you
in
up,
the country?
Yeah, but if I can take up that Parliament attack was very different. There were a lot of other factors that had happened just after 9/11. Today, if you look at the situation, with the exception of China, which obviously keeps on blocking any action against Masood Azhar, and that may be something else that India should be thinking about, its attitude to China, if it is going to, even today, when every other country is expressing support.
That's the point I'm trying to make, Vikram. That, I mean, on the one hand, we're promising, or we're promising the country, and we're telling the world that we will ensure that China is isolated internationally. That Pakistan is isolated internationally, and yet we've hardly been able to get anything beyond a fairly wishy-washy condemnation of yesterday's attack, with again a reiteration that China will not allow any action against Masood Azhar. So,
but that's China. All other countries have spoken out.
Take place?
as I'm saying, that's China. All other countries have, in a sense, spoken far more strongly, far more vociferously. So maybe, and there's conversations.
Come on, Vikram. We're talking about China. We're not talking about the Solomon Islands. Let's understand the significance of China in the world today. If China was an insignificant international player, then it wouldn't matter what China had to say. But please understand, I mean, China has huge diplomatic muscle, huge financial muscle behind it, and they have no hesitation in putting that muscle to use behind Pakistan. So, I mean, let's not wish away the importance of China in the global scheme of things. So when we talk about isolating Pakistan, if we can't isolate Pakistan from its closest allies, I mean, I'm curious to see what the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is going to say. He's visiting Pakistan, I think this weekend, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, but if
tomorrow
you can't,
day after. Let's see.
So hang on, if you're saying international action is not possible, economically, now that we've withdrawn MFN, not that much more can be done, then is the only option.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying
the only option military action, surgical strikes,
what we promise our countrymen.
Yeah, but I'm saying, so therefore is the only option, therefore, and let's remember this is an election year, so the government has to do something, and it has to be seen to be doing something. I mean, it would do it even if it was not an election year, presumably, but especially in an election year, I don't see how the government can just sit back and not take any action right now. So are we saying that some sort of military action or another surgical strike is the only route forward?
Look, Vikram, politics is the worst reason to take military action. If military action is only being justified because of elections, then I'm sorry, but that is the worst disservice you can do to the sacrifice.
I'm not saying it should be done because of the election. I'm not saying it should be done because of the elections, and obviously even the government won't say we're doing this because of the elections. The government will say after Uri we took action, and that time there were no elections anywhere on the horizon. So all I'm saying is that the ability for any government not to take action after the murder of 40 of its Jawans is it's reduced at the best of times. That in an election year it's almost impossible for them not to do something.
Which is why I made the point when you first asked me this question that whatever response is thought of will have to be carefully calibrated, will have to be carefully thought through. I mean, let's also look at the climatic conditions that prevail today. When you responded to the Uri attack, it wasn't in the dead of winter. Today, most of your mountain areas are covered under a far heavier blanket of snow than they have been in previous. Will that be a factor in your ability to respond militarily? There are any number of factors that come into play that I don't think we need to be discussing on open channels here today. But if I'm not mistaken, the government has called an all-party meeting in Delhi tomorrow. Perhaps they will outline some possibilities of responses that they are thinking of, and will invite suggestions from other political parties.
And I think that's only correct. I think this is one of the areas that should. This is one of the things that should unite all parties. And I'm glad to see that the opposition has come out and said that we will back the government in whatever steps it intends to take. Which, by the way, is something which I think, we've been seeing this Twitter battle between you and one of the ministers.
The ones who are driving a wedge and playing politics with this are members of the ruling party. I mean, take for example the despicable tweets of the Minister of State in the Prime Minister's office. Nobody more than him has sought to politicize the deaths of these Jawans in Pulwama yesterday. So it's actually amazing that the opposition and parties that are otherwise deadly opposed to the BJP are coming and committing their support to the government and sort of their solidarity in this difficult time. And it's people like the Minister of State in the Prime Minister's office that are seeking to politicize what happened yesterday.
But you must be hearing a lot of this. You must have heard a lot of it, especially in the last 24 hours. It's not just the person you're referring to, whom you've been having a battle with on Twitter. It's others. The television news channels are essentially accusing you and other mainstream politicians in Jammu and Kashmir of pandering to Pakistan and pandering to terrorists. So is this something which is this particular discourse, is it something that is gathering ground, and does it disturb you?
Oh, Vikram, there are trolls, and then there are, for want of a better term, VVIPs. Had the statements that were made yesterday been made by a regular BJP social media warrior, I wouldn't have bothered. But let's not forget where the gentleman that I'm talking about sits. He sits in an office down the corridor from the Prime Minister of India. You talked about news channels that have sought to blame me, my party, and other mainstream political players in Kashmir for this. Now, where do they get their instructions from? It's not my words. It's a senior BJP member of parliament like Mr. Subramaniam Swamy, who has said that these channels take their directions from the BJP. So my limited point is that yes, the opposition will stand by the government in this time of need. They will support the government in what the government decides to do as a further step. But the BJP also needs to look at its own conduct and the way in which they and some of their senior people and the channels that they patronize have conducted themselves in the aftermath of yesterday.
All right. This is today. India is still in mourning. India is still, trying to figure out how to take stock and move on from here. So it's not the time perhaps for a full post-mortem. But you have been the Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. You're aware of the SOPs that are normally followed. That particular road going down past Avantipura and heading down towards Anantnag. You must have been on it 100 times or 1,000 times. There are procedures that are followed. There are road opening parties. You are careful about IEDs. You worry about the possibility of explosives. Were you somewhat surprised that this suicide bomber was able to get to this CRPF convoy with so many soldiers on it?
No, I wasn't surprised at all. Had this been an IED that had been planted under a culvert or by the side of the road, I would have been surprised. But the fact that this was an explosive device planted in a vehicle that managed to make its way into the convoy, I'm not surprised at all. We've all seen how vulnerable convoys are to attack. We know that convoys, more so in recent years, have allowed civilian vehicles to sort of overtake in a phased manner. I've seen with my own convoys and other protected people's convoys in Kashmir that stray vehicles manage to find their way within the convoy. So I'm not surprised. I think the organization behind this recognized this vulnerability and took advantage of it. And wasn't it Margaret Thatcher who once very famously said that they have to be lucky only once, we have to be lucky every single time? As I said, they found this vulnerability and they've exploited this. I had, and I tweeted this a while ago, I had actually suggested once the railway line became operational between Banihal and the rest of the valley, that we should think about moving some of our troops by train rather than by road, because I believe that it will be far easier to protect and far quicker to move them than by road. At that time, this suggestion didn't find favor. I understand that even though a lot of people have been saying, why don't we fly them? You can't really fly them in such numbers. It's not possible. But certainly, along with the highway, I don't see why there should be a problem looking at the option of moving troops by train.
So that and any other suggestions you will be making, when this all-party meeting, as the government reaches out to you, tries to get your sense of what should and should not happen out there?
Sure. Yeah, we will.
All right. Omar Abdullah, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for speaking. It's a really disturbing time. Let's hope the appropriate lessons from this are learned, and let's hope that the suitable action that needs to be taken to prevent any other such attacks are taken going forward. Thank you so much for speaking to us.